I'm David McDivitt, and in this video, I'm going to go through the 3 things you need to be looking for to understand the difference between a lawyer who practices personal injury and a lawyer who specializes in wrongful death law. Wrongful death is a subset of personal injury law. Now, when you're looking for a lawyer to help you out in a situation where you've lost a loved one, it's important that you don't just look for a personal injury lawyer, but that you look for somebody who specializes in wrongful death law. All right, number 1, wrongful death, while it is typically considered to be part of personal injury, will often have its own rules that lawyers have to follow in order to prosecute a claim. It may also have its own statute of limitations, which means that there may be a particular statute of limitations for an auto crash, for example, or a motorcycle crash. If that crash leads to an injury but not death, it may fall in this bucket. That same crash leads to the death of somebody, it might fall into this bucket with a different set of statutes of limitations. That means lawsuits have to be filed sometimes earlier if there's been a death than they would if somebody had just been injured. Same set of circumstances leading up to that crash. But because the outcome was different in this situation versus this situation, the statute of limitations is different. So on a very fundamental level, you need a lawyer who understands the difference in the statutes of limitations that apply to a wrongful death versus a standard personal injury case. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is complicated, and it's where a lawyer really needs to know what they're doing. But a case has to be pled differently if it's a wrongful death claim than if it's a personal injury claim. For example, let's go back to that scenario where you have the same set of circumstances leading up to an auto crash, for example, but the outcome is different. Somebody was injured versus somebody dies. The lawyer has to plead that case differently. That means the words that they use in a lawsuit are different than the words that they use in a lawsuit over here. Those words matter, and they can actually determine the outcome of a claim. Pled incorrectly can lead to that claim being completely dismissed by the judge. It's critical that you find a lawyer who has the experience of dealing with wrongful death claims. The second reason why it's important to look for a lawyer who specializes in wrongful death cases is because the way that the lawyer needs to help the family build up the case is oftentimes completely different. In a traditional personal injury claim, the client is the one who's been physically injured. It's their story that's being told in front of a jury. In a wrongful death case, part of it is the story of the person who was killed. A large part is the story of the survivors, those who were left. And it's important to have a lawyer who understands the nuance between those two and knows how to explain to a jury how significant that loss is to the family, to the survivors. It is a larger story that is told in a wrongful death claim. The resources that a lawyer has to put into pursuing a wrongful death claim are sometimes greater. Not because the case for a personal injury victim is no less, but it's because you're telling the story of sometimes multiple people. Sometimes it's the story of the children that were left behind, the spouse that was left behind. These stories matter. Having a lawyer who understands how to tell a story is vital. That the suffering that you've experienced and that you will always experience is appropriately explained to a jury so that that jury can understand you, can fairly evaluate the loss that you've experienced. And there's no amount of money that can bring back your loved one. But there is an opportunity for a jury to award money to help you with your recovery, for the healing, and to try to make things a little bit better for the family that's left behind. The third reason why it's important for you to find a lawyer who specializes in wrongful death litigation is because specialists understand exactly who can bring a wrongful death claim. Not anybody impacted by the loss of somebody can bring the claim. And every state is going to be different. Oftentimes, a spouse or a child is the one who can bring the claim. Also, it's the timing of who can bring the claim. For example, in some states, a spouse is the first one who can make the claim. If the spouse chooses not to make the claim, in some states, maybe after 1 year, then the children are able to make the claim. In a family structure where you have a spouse and let's say 2 children, and one of the parents is killed, that spouse, and if the children are minors, that spouse is going to be representing that whole family unit, right? But if you have a situation where you have adult children, for example, and maybe it was a second marriage, and so that spouse is not the parent of the adult children of the deceased, while that spouse may be the one who can make that claim at first, if that spouse does not, then those adult children can step into that claim a little bit later. And again, it's state specific, and it's vital that you have a lawyer who understands those nuances. There are things that we can't even get to in this video that we'll talk about in another video, including the allocation of money if there is a verdict or a settlement in favor of the family of somebody who's died. How that money gets allocated among the survivors is going to be different, and it, again, is in a completely different context than traditional personal injury case. One more reason why you need a lawyer who specializes in wrongful death. Another thing that we're going to talk about is what happens when that death occurs in a hospital or a medical clinic. Brings up an entirely different set, typically, of regulations. The takeaway to this is that there are nuances, there are differences, some subtle, some extreme, between a wrongful death claim and a personal injury claim. Now, while wrongful death typically falls underneath the umbrella of personal injury, it has its own rules. And in almost every state, those rules are going to be different than in a standard personal injury claim. Wrongful death is very complicated, and it's very important for you, if you've lost a loved one, to find a lawyer who specializes not just in personal injury, but in wrongful death. I appreciate your time today. I hope I've answered some of your questions, and if you have any more questions, please feel free to direct message me or reach out to our law firm. Thank you.